Fleet Air Arm, the world's most mobile fighting force. A force with the ability to move with the utmost speed to any part of the world. This mobility rests, in the first instance, with the means of transport, the aircraft carrier. But HMS Eagle is much more than that. The modern aircraft carrier is a floating, computer-controlled city with a population of some 3,000 inhabitants and about 50 aircraft. Yet its cost is only half that of an equivalent shore base. These gigantic floating airfields are capable of carrying out and dealing with every aspect of war in the air and at sea. Tactical strikes against a ground-based enemy, close support for our troops, no matter where, air-to-air combat using guided missiles, defense and attack against hostile submarines. The Buccaneers, Scimitars, Gannets and Vixens of today owe much to the faith and courage of the far-seeing flyers of yesterday. Men who struggle against official opposition and lack of funds paved the way for a fighting force which is now accepted as an integral part of a navy committed to a world role. At the time, though, their early experiments often resulted in disaster and sometimes tragic loss. Defense of this modern, floating, highly mobile airfield is all important. Much is at stake in terms of lives, equipment and money. Over the horizon, guided missile ships supply medium-ranged anti-aircraft defense. Closer at hand, frigates perform a similar task, as well as seeking and destroying submarines. The destroyers and frigates employ their own helicopters, assisted by anti-submarine Wessex helicopters from the carrier itself. Early warning radar pictures are transmitted back to the task force by the Gannet. On board Eagle, there is growing activity. Our ground forces are in difficulties. Assistance has been called for to destroy a viaduct, a vital link in the enemy supply line. A demolition job is planned.
Well, the pattern of weather that we've been experiencing during the last few days, the fine weather is now starting to break up as the anticyclone moves away to the east. And we are now experiencing a moist southerly airstream.
The ship's position at launch will be 270 Kilo Kilo 58, course 345, speed 15. Hook-on weights, as for the last recovery, are on the board. Chicken fuel states are calculated for VMC.
And they will be directed into the joiner. After fueling, the Buccaneers will continue on their high-low profile, and the Scimitars will come straight back for recovery. Are there any questions, please?
For Guy Harris and Dave Thompson, new to this particular carrier, it's the first operational sortie. They are the pilot and observer of Buccaneer number 106, call sign 022.
Out on a heading of 360 in the climb, moving out into normal battle formation. The Ds will rendezvous us on our operational frequency with the tankers at 25,000 feet, and the formation for rendezvousing will be as on
the briefings are almost finished, and very soon the air crews will be grabbing a quick cup of coffee before takeoff. Someone who hasn't time for coffee right now is the flying controller, known to the Navy as Lieutenant Commander Flying, or Little F.
Compass platform, Flyco, I'd like 30 knots for the next launch at 17:30.
Have you got the thrust meter readings, Dave?
Yeah. 1.82 port and 1.81 starboard.
1.82 and 1.81.
Yeah.
Right, well, let's go then.
Okay.
Aircrew, man aircraft.
Guy and Dave, like every member of the strike force, are specialists. Intensive training, experience and physical fitness all go to make up a small but select group of fighting men. Buccaneers of the jet age, as tested and dynamic as the sophisticated machines they fly. Men to whom the old adage of joining the Navy and seeing the world still holds a certain magic. A month ago, patrolling in the Indian Ocean. A week ago, relaxing in Hong Kong. And now, back to business.
Stand by to start up all aircraft.
Stand clear of rotors, propellers, jet pipes and intakes. Start up.
One of the most fascinating aircraft in service, the helicopter performs many different roles. In this case, the plane guard watches over the aircraft being launched, and there are those whose duties are to protect the carrier from submarine attack. Rather unattractive in appearance is the Gannet. But after all, when you're the airborne eyes of the fleet, looks aren't everything. Adding their twin voices to the already ear-splitting din on deck are the Sea Vixens, the carrier's shield against possible air attack. The scimitars are the flying filling stations. By topping them up in flight, they enable the buccaneers to strike the enemy hundreds of miles away. The strike leader now taxis to the catapult, and his aircraft is lined up, ready for takeoff. The Buccaneer, costing upwards of £750,000, is one of the most complex and advanced weapon systems in active service. The responsibility resting on the shoulders of the pilot is immense. The next to go is 106. It's a tense moment for Guy Harris because he's faced with the prospect of being catapulted into the air at a speed of 145 knots, over 170 miles an hour. The carrier distills its own fresh water from the sea. This is essential because apart from other uses, each time the steam catapult launches an aircraft, 300 gallons of fresh water are used up. Enough to go with 17,000 tots of rum. Now airborne, they're in constant contact with control on board the carrier, whose first job on every operation is to guide them to their refueling rendezvous.
02 leader from Alpha. Your tankers are on the centre line at 15 miles. My gadget gives me Angels 25. Now just left of the centre line, range 10.
Roger.
Your tankers are in a port orbit. Height is the same. Now left 10, range 7.
Roger. Contact.
Left 15 to now, range 5. Understand contact.
Confirmed and no visual.
Range 4. Understand visual.
Affirmative.
D. Tankers are joined, sir.
Yes, the tankers are joined. That is, the rendezvous has been made. But the physical link is yet to come. A link which will result in some of the 1,300 gallons of fuel carried by each of the scimitars being transferred to the strike aircraft, whilst both are travelling at a speed of somewhere around 300 miles an hour. Tanks topped up, the Buccaneers pick up speed and press on. This part of the operation, incidentally, may become less necessary in the future with the new long-range Rolls-Royce Spey engines fitted to the Mark II Buccaneer. As the strike aircraft head for their target, the helicopters are keeping a watchful eye open for hostile submarines with their dipping sonar. Keeping an eye open upstairs are the Vixens on combat air patrol, who split into two pairs, low cap at 5,000 feet and high cap at 40,000, to guard against air attack at any altitude. "150 miles to go, and the Buccaneers are dropping down for a low-level run-in. 15 minutes and they'll be over the target. 15 of the most critical minutes of the whole operation. "10 feet above the sea, they prepare to slip in undetected over the coast and under the enemy radar. Well in from the coast, the four aircraft grab altitude before starting their bombing run. The tension mounts as the target is sighted. Now the human element of the operation gives way almost entirely to the computer-controlled bombing system. minutes, all systems go as the strike leader commences his run-in. A workmanlike job completed, the idea now is to show a clean pair of heels and hot-footed for home. A home shrouded in the vastness of the ocean. In the comparative tranquility of the carrier, a welcome home is being prepared as recovery stations are manned. The Vixens join the circuit as the carrier swings into wind and picks up speed, ready to receive the returning aircraft. Deck landings may sometimes look pretty clumsy, but when your arrestor hook has to catch a wire within a 50-foot stretch of deck at 150 miles an hour, daintiness is the least of your worries.
Two leader from Alpha. I'm holding you now at 50 miles, and your heading is good for Mother, over. Stand by for present weather. The weather has deteriorated. Cloud base is down to 200 feet. Visibility is 1 mile, and your recovery will be Charlie, Charlie, Alpha, over.
Charlie, Charlie, Alpha, a carrier-controlled approach. The Buccaneers will have to be talked down onto the deck, a tricky and highly skilled operation. The pilot flies blind to within 200 feet of the sea, then looks up from his instruments for the final line-up with the angled flight deck. Guy and Dave sweat it out as they let down into the cloud.
Just coming through the gate now, 022, heading 200, still good. Slow descent now to hold 2,000 feet and advise.
2,000 feet, what time?
Turn right, heading at 245. 245, your new heading.
Right onto 245. 022, holding 2,000 feet.
Roger, understand, holding 2,000 feet. Further right, now heading at 270, final approach. 270, the new heading. Just 11 miles to go.
Right onto 270.
10 miles to go now. Circuit speed, vital actions, advise me 4 greens.
What time? Four greens.
Roger, understand, 4 greens. 8 miles to go. Heading 270, still good. Call me now, channel 5, Pugger 4.
022, you're loud and clear. 6 miles, confirm 4 greens.
Affirmative, 4 greens.
Roger, maintain heading 270. Do not acknowledge further instructions and prepare to lose height. Commence your slow descent now at 5 miles. Turn left 2 degrees, heading at 268. 1,200 feet at 3 miles. Final check of your approach speed as you pass 1,000 feet. Half a mile, 200 feet. Look up for the sight. Final controller listening out.
At 22, you're high, bring her down. Coming up to the Roger. Hold it there. Keep her coming. You're going high again. Still going high. Bolt up, bolt up.
.022 overshoots and goes round again for another approach after the other two buccaneers have been talked down. There's a sigh of relief as number 106 catches a wire at the second attempt. Just the gannets to land, and all the fixed-wing aircraft will be home and dry. So the mission is over. The strike successful. A success made possible by using carrier-borne aircraft. But technical development never stands still. In a few years, shipborne tactical and strategic missiles will be the Royal Navy's main strike and defense weapons. This move into the missile age has in fact already begun. Many of Her Majesty's ships at sea today are equipped with these latest weapon systems. More ships with even more advanced missiles are to follow. But for some years yet, our ground forces and the Royal Navy will still be able to rely on the Fleet Air Arm equipped with Buccaneers and soon the 2,000-mile-an-hour Phantom for speedy and powerful assistance whenever and wherever required.
Portsmouth in October, and this is the aircraft carrier, Victorious, leaving on the Foreign Service leg of her commission. She's going out east. Before she gets there, though, she has to be an efficient carrier, and that takes work and practice. The young men manning the flight deck have heard of Hong Kong and Singapore from the geography books, but they've no real idea what they're like. Before they get the chance of seeing them, they've a lot of hard work and practice to make the ship into an efficient fighting unit of the fleet. Furthermore, they're going to see as a team for the first time, and the hard work starts before she is out of sight of land. She's off to the Mediterranean for this practice, and after her squadrons have flown on, she makes her first stop at Gibraltar. It's only a short stop for self-maintenance, in order to iron out any snags they found on the passage out. Jet aircraft and modern radar need a bit of knowing. But a few of the men off duty get a run ashore, and for some of them it's their first time abroad. There she is, and everyone on board is working flat out, because very soon they're off to sea again for intensive flying exercises. Nearing Malta, the Captain Air Mediterranean comes on board to arrange for these exercises, and so the helicopters fly ashore to play about on their own. As yet, the ship's company is only just beginning to learn the complicated business of operating high-speed aircraft from the restricted deck of a carrier. The pilots have done all this before, but the flight deck parties have got it all to learn. To keep ships operating for long periods away from bases, all stores are now taken on board at sea. This is their first replenishment from the store ship. Off they go to Malta. This is the base of the Mediterranean fleet, and has been since the time of Nelson. She'll be going in and out of Malta often on exercises. Here she meets the Ark Royal, who is an old hand and will provide a bit of competition in the complex business of operating modern aircraft. Even on a misty November morning, the way to see Vesuvius is from the Bay of Naples. This was a visit to show the flag, one of the important peacetime duties of the Navy, and a pleasant change from the serious job of working up to fighting efficiency. The Victorious is now joined by the Ark Royal and Hermes for flying exercises carried out under the command of Flag Officer aircraft carriers. After that, the Victorious is off on her own, out of the Mediterranean and into the Atlantic for Cape Town. From now on, the routine is 4 days flying and 1 day's maintenance, night and day for 30 days straight. Her escort is the frigate Blackpool. The only break is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when flying stops, so that the people who work down below, more than half the ship's company, get a chance of some fresh air and some exercise on the flight deck. She is getting into the tropics now, and though it's February, it's pretty hot below decks. A day or two later, King Neptune comes on board to welcome those who have never crossed the line into his southern domain. These ceremonies are an age-old custom of the sea, carried out by every ship crossing the equator, whether merchantman or warship. A couple of weeks on, and the new subjects of King Neptune are nearing Cape Town. And here is that famous landmark, Table Mountain. A most stately thing, said Drake, who saw it on his voyage around the world, and the fairest cape we saw in the whole circumference of the earth. The ship had brought out a new Queen's colour to be presented to the South American and South Atlantic station, and this raised a bit of a problem. Normally, a colour can only be presented on British soil, but South Africa was now a republic, and the flight deck of the Victorious was the nearest sovereign territory. This was the first time a Queen's colour had been presented on board ship, and special dispensation had to be obtained from Her Majesty in order to do so. After the ceremony, the Victorious repaid a little of Cape Town's hospitality by throwing the ship open to visitors, before starting out on the long haul around Africa and up to Aden. And this is Aden. Following naval custom, the ship salutes the flag of the local commander-in-chief. In the past, Aden was a coaling station on the way to India. Today, it is an important base covering the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. It is one of the hotter places of the world. There is no rainfall, and all water has to be distilled or imported. All right for camels, but not so good for sailors. Her supply ship east of Suez is never far away. She appears over the horizon every few days to replenish with food, equipment and stores for what is virtually a floating town of 2,000 people. They couldn't carry on flying without a supply ship. You see, every time the carrier catapults an aircraft, one of these strops is expended. It falls into the sea and cannot be recovered. Normally, the ship produces her own oxygen for high-altitude flying. But with all the training going on night and day, she needs an additional supply. And here are some cylinders coming on board. For this evolution, all hands are required, and some have better jobs than others. The supply ship casts off, and the carrier resumes her normal routine steaming across the Indian Ocean, south of Ceylon and down the Malacca Straits to Singapore. Now she is really out east. The tugs look different. The shore is different. the smell is new. It's steaming hot, and Portsmouth is 13,000 miles away. The Victorious is now a unit of the Far Eastern Fleet, and for 6 months she'll be under the orders of the Commander-in-Chief at Singapore. HMS Terror, the naval base. This is where the companies of ships on the station can get a change from their cramped quarters afloat. It's April, but it's hotter than any English summer. Here they can spread themselves and relax for a while in a sort of country club, but not for long. While the Victorious is exercising in the South China Sea, the Belfast, flying the flag of the second-in-command Far East, comes alongside so that the Admiral can have a look at the latest addition to his fleet. As a complete change from the bright lights of Singapore, the ship spent the weekend at an island where you can't spend any money. Palau Tioman is an island off the coast of Malaya, where ships go to lead the simple life for a day or two between jobs. By this time, the Victorious had steamed 41,000 miles in 117 days at sea. She was in the middle of flying exercises on the way up to the delights of Hong Kong when a signal was received which read, "Proceed to the Persian Gulf with all dispatch." She needed fuel to get there, and her own oiler was on ahead, so another was diverted to fuel her. There was trouble at Kuwait, and now the Victorious was off on her main purpose, the protection of British interests abroad. With the Cassandra in company, she was off at full speed across the Indian Ocean again to the Persian Gulf. They thought Aden was warm, but in the Gulf the sea was so hot that even the water didn't cool you off. She was standing by for 21 stifling days, and in between flying sorties, the madder people played deck hockey. It may not look it, but the carrier was providing distant cover for the operations, and within minutes she could have been flying off attack aircraft. All the time, of course, constant watch was being kept by radar to see what was happening over Kuwait. One of the troubles in this part of the world is the sand which is blown off the desert out to sea and coats everything in sight. This meant that the squadron personnel were busy all the time keeping their jets clean. After 3 weeks of heat and sand, another carrier relieved the Victorious, and she steamed 3,000 miles south to Mombasa. As she steamed out of the Gulf, the temperatures of sea and air dropped 12 degrees in half an hour. When you've been 7 weeks out of sight of land, cool breezes and a green countryside are a very pleasant relief. These arches were put up for the visit of the Queen. They are the gateway to East Africa. This was the dry weather season, so as many of the ship's company as could be spared went up country on safari. The 12 days rest period is over, and the parties which had been up country are back on board with yarns of Kilimanjaro, Nairobi, and the Tsavo Game Reserve. Now back to the Far East with flying duties all the way. There goes a strop. Clifford Pier and Singapore roads. By this time, Victorious had been away just a year and steamed 80,000 miles, the equivalent of 3 times around the world. Every visitor to Singapore has a look around the famous Tiger Balm Gardens. On this visit, there was a chance to give the landing parties some training ashore. Off to Hong Kong at last, or are they? Yes, they've made it. No diversions this time. Look at this famous port now. 100 years ago, it was just a bare, rocky island with no houses, not a tree, and just a few fishermen. That was last century. Now, under the British, it's one of the busiest ports in the world with a population of millions. The ship's company founded a wonderful shopping centre with everything duty-free. A large part of the local population are born, live their lives and die in these sampans, though they do their shopping ashore. The Chinese are a frugal people and use every yard of soil by terrace farming. Across the harbour from Hong Kong is the mainland, but when you see this sign, it's as well to obey it, for on the other side is communist China. The crest of Victorious formed by the ship's company was the farewell salute to Hong Kong. Their next port of call was in the Philippines. The purpose of their visit was to organize final details for a cross-operation exercise with the American carrier Ticonderoga. Whilst these American planes were landing on Victorious, their squadrons were flying onto the Ticonderoga. This is a demon. Now a Skyhawk. And a Sky Raider. These combined exercises are all part of the training of the forces of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. The deck handling drills and signals are now common to all the navies of the free world. A helicopter acts as plane guard in case of accidents. Homeward bound and another diversion. You'll never know what'll happen next. They were in the middle of the Indian Ocean when suddenly the ship was ordered to Mombasa. This time it was floods in Kenya, a rescue job for the helicopters. It had been raining for weeks, and the swift-flowing Subaki River had broken its banks and flooded miles of villages, fields and crops. The helicopters were now out on their own. Only 12 hours from disembarking, the squadron found itself spread along 150 miles of African coast, with very few stores and unreliable communications. Temporary bases were set up in the heart of the jungle, and from these the helicopters carried out their task. The situation was this. The seed for the next crops had been destroyed, and unless new seed could be taken around the villages, the tribesmen would starve. With the local knowledge of the district commissioner, the Navy reached the stricken villages. A second problem was the stranded cattle of the Masai tribesmen. As it was, the Masai were cut off by the floods from their food. The job, therefore, was to ferry the cattle across the swollen Subaki to the people on the other side. In one operation alone, the helicopters lifted 140 cattle in one day. To speed things up, the sailors mucked in too. And back goes the chopper for yet another one. Whilst this cow was admiring the view over Kenya, the Victorious had already reached Aden. It was December, and the sailors were doing their Christmas shopping. Two days later, they were at the entrance of the Suez Canal, 100 miles straight through the desert to the Mediterranean. The most famous bumboatman in the world, Jim Irish, had sent his men on board the night before at Suez to sell his goods to the credulous sailors. This isn't the first canal to join the Mediterranean with the Red Sea. The Pharaohs built one 4,000 years ago, but over the centuries the desert sands silted it up, and all trace of it disappeared. Nowadays, dredgers like this are continuously at work keeping the channel clear. But what all these fellows are thinking is, will we be home for Christmas? On past the Anzac Memorial, out into the Mediterranean, and a quick look in at Malta to take in fuel for a fast trip home. Overland, the jets are within one hop of home. They'll be there tonight. On December the 18th, the Victorious was back into blues and steaming up harbour at Portsmouth. Those presents will come in useful for Christmas, and that suntan will look pretty good around the Christmas tree.
World's Fair at Seattle in the state of Washington. The only World Fair ever to make a profit. And not one British sailor was the least surprised at that, since they charged 14 bob to get in. Americans wandered around oohing and aahing, but the crew of the Belfast had a funny feeling that we'd seen it all before. The details were vague after 18 months of globetrotting, but there was hardly a country exhibiting at Seattle that we hadn't visited since we flew out from Britain in the March of '61 to HMS Belfast at Singapore. Largest and one of the oldest of the Navy's cruisers, HMS Belfast was now a flagship on the Far East station. Doubtless some of us thought we'd get a cushy number and visualized shore runs to Pacific islands, sipping coconut wine as we watched the dusky maidens preparing our food. But every time the old man choppered on board, we knew that all we'd get over the next week or two would be backache and blisters. For the Navy rarely stops training, and day or night you practice firefighting or collision drill, or you rescue non-existent men who've fallen overboard. And as you train, you sometimes remember your predecessors who took the Belfast into battle in 1943 at North Cape. She was the first ship to get the enemy on her radar, and the first ship to fire in the action that destroyed the Scharnhorst, the action that may have been the last classic battle between heavy surface ships that the world will ever see. Operation Tuckerbox took us to Australia, and the largest single-span coat hanger in the world. But if we thought the Sydney Harbour Bridge was enormous, it paled into insignificance when compared with the generosity of Sydney's welcome. houses may have been covered more with mortgages than paint, but it didn't show. And the idyllic life of swimming and parties was so distracting that the zoo, normally one of those places that lonely men go, barely saw one of the Belfast's crew. Amphibian gives way to fully submersible in the Pacific, as we rendezvous with a tactician and pass mail to her, to help her pass the boredom of a 6-week exercise. Soon, everyone off watch crowded the rails and ogled at communist junks and sampans and women in black poplin trousers as we arrived in Hong Kong, one of the most fascinating ports in the world. Several of the China station's minesweepers formed an escort for Princess Alexandra as she came out in the Admiral's barge to the Belfast. But most of us were even more anxious to see one of Hong Kong's most fabulous characters, Sampan Jenny. Jenny's been around for years now, supplying side parties to paint Navy vessels in exchange for the ship's waste. Nobody knows what she does with it, but she's mysteriously rumoured to own half the waterfront. November the 11th, and the Belfast in Hong Kong joins with millions throughout the world in remembering. Thousands stand in the cold rains of Whitehall, but here it was 70 in the shade as Princess Alexandra pays homage to the millions who did not live to see the peace. After a few days in Hong Kong, we got quite expert at bargaining and thought we got everything at rock-bottom price, until some old hands told us we'd paid far more than we should have done and were ruining it for everyone else. But don't let them kid you that the Navy is all sunbathing and sightseeing. It's often, such as when you replenish at sea, ruddy hard work. But the time and motion study boys are at work all the while, and mechanical aids are taking a lot of the sweat out of refueling and revictualling. You might be, and often are, at sea for weeks on end. But the ship's newspaper, the radio and regular mail drops make you feel that you haven't been completely forgotten. Some of us even like the life. And the number of Chinese cooks and stewards who were awarded long service and good conduct medals proved that it's a career worth taking up. Across the Indian Ocean to Dar es Salaam at the start of the rainy season, the Governor-General came aboard, a man who was soon to be out of a job. But Tanganyika was to become independent on the 8th of December. The local football stadium was the setting for the independence ceremony, and we watched the King's African Rifles marching for the last time. Within an hour, they would become the Tanganyika Rifles as another independent country emerged from Africa. We left Africa in the evening. The Governor-General came down to the jetty to see us off, and the Belfast's 80,000 horsepower dug her screws in for the 5,000-mile voyage to Singapore and on to Japan. We, like everyone else, fell in love with Japan, the land of cherry blossom and kimonos, of flower arrangements and gaily coloured birds. Japan we remember mainly for the orphans' party we threw on board when the ship became a fun fair. And the kids had the time of their lives. with the exception of one little charmer who sulked all day because we wouldn't plonk a 6-inch shell in the middle of his schoolhouse. There was a different sort of party in San Francisco when we had an open day, and many Americans learned to their astonishment that Britain had a navy. Shore leave too in Frisco, and a chance for us to examine the Americans as amateur sociologists and ornithologists. And the Marines were warned to be careful with their matches, as a couple of 100 years ago they burned down the White House. As a sailor, you get a unique opportunity to study bridges. And after a while, you become quite expert at spotting rust patches and trying to recognize where you are from the style of construction. Vancouver's bridge fooled most of us, since few had previously visited Canada. Being at sea for long periods makes you pine for two things, and one of them is the smell and sight of trees. We hired cars and drove up to the Rockies and made a trip that really sticks in our memories. When we were at sea again, transferring, refueling and always exercising, the two ships never travelled together in the Navy without improving their tactics and training for the battle which may never come. We tried out pre-wetting nozzles which would wash away nuclear contamination if we passed through an atomic cloud. The training paid off one afternoon when a Mayday flashed from a Sea Vixen some 30 miles from the Belfast. Radar fixed the position of his prang and the ship raced to the rescue at 32 knots. Navy choppers were there before us and grabbed the pilot, but our boat's crew rescued the observer and collected what debris was still floating so that the technicians might be able to decide what went wrong. And we'd had a practical demonstration that our 18 months of training really paid off in an emergency. In 18 months, we'd covered tens of thousands of miles and seen 17 countries. Yet when we look back, it's the funny and pleasant moments we remember in a kaleidoscope of coloured memories. The afternoon exercise periods in the Pacific, diving into the shark-proofed private swimming pool of the Belfast, the regatta at Trincomalee, when we took on the rest of the Navy and went down fighting. That glorious afternoon when the electrical division was invited to lower the whaler and sank the darn thing. They went away mumbling that they'd invite us to rewire a transformer one day and see what sort of job we'd make of that. Now, as we approached the Panama Canal, we passed under the first bridge to link North and South America, part of the Pan American Highway, which one day will link the 10,000 miles between Alaska and Chile. It felt strange to be in an inland waterway after 18 months at sea. Stranger still to think it cost $1 a ton, say £4,000 in pilot fees to get the Belfast through the Panama Canal. The blue of the Pacific gave way to the grey of the North Atlantic as we cracked on for the last few days to Plymouth. Our Cook's tour was over. The commission ended. If we'd been civilian vacationers, the trip would have cost £3,000 or £4,000. But as we came into Plymouth, every single one of us would have said that this was the best moment of the lot. We'd seen the world, from the spruce and fir of Canada to the eucalyptus trees of Australia and Japan's apple blossom. Next time we leave British shores, it might be in a destroyer, an aircraft carrier or a frigate. Our destination might be any one of the 5 foreign stations. And you could come and see the world with us, if you want to.